The Center, with your host, DC Radical One.
Greetings, Black family, and welcome to On the Wake Up Radio. I am your host, DC Radical One, and you have entered the center. Shout out to our wonderful producer, Cindy Ashby. You can check us out on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and iHeartRadio at On the Wake Up Radio. Also, you can check us out here on YouTube and now on Instagram via my DC Radical One handle for both. Peace to the integrative school psychologist, BB Foday, Straight Black Pride, the brother Kevin, BB Foday, and you got ripped off. And peace to brother Lee Clinton. Unfortunately, I cannot see who's on the Instagram side. And of course, yeah, put a one in the chat if you can actually hear me. BB Foday, Straight Black Pride, the brother Crow. So I'm assuming y'all can hear me. No one has said anything yet. Yeah, can I get a one in the chat so I know that I'm good sound wise? Please. Sante Sana. So tonight's discussion, I'm going to talk about 21st century battle for Africa. This probably is part 1 of 2, or at least it's going to be an ongoing series. I'm not sure. And so what we're going to talk about today is how, well, y'all saw the thumbnail. We're going to talk about the traitors, the nationalists, and the enemies. And of course, doing all that in one program in 2 hours would be monumental. So that's not going to all take place tonight. We're going to do readings to real Black gentlemen. So what we're going to do is more of case studies. And then that will give us the outline of what we need to look into and look forward to. Also learning from the past to be able to see what's going on now and predict the future. So also, as I said, we'll be ongoing with our 30 and 30 posts in 30 days. So I hope you all have enjoyed the shorts from the museum shorts. I got a couple more museum shorts coming up. Should be on the channel. I have a couple of videos coming up. One dealing with Israel's propaganda, using social media for propaganda. And I forgot what the other one is, but when I think of it, I'll get to it. And I'm thinking about either coming back this Thursday or Friday for another live stream. I'll let you all know. I'll put it up on Instagram and via the YouTube channel. Also, don't forget to check out Brother Irritated Jenny tomorrow at 6 p.m. You can find him on Twitter at JAT Problem. That's JAT Problem. So you can catch him there. So that is pretty much, I think, all the announcements I have thus far. We're working on something that hopefully I'll be able to announce later this week. It's very exciting, at least to me. And Brother Jenny got something he's working on too. I forgot. That should be coming up at the end of the month. So I'll have that notification probably next week, unless he has a change of plans. So I'm going to pick our music tonight. I forgot to actually pick music, so I'm not sure what we're going to be listening to. Let's see what this is. Here. All right. So y'all let me know about the volume on that. That too loud or what? Yeah, we're gonna go with some blues. So we good with it? We good with the volume, the music volume? It's not too loud for anybody? All right, I don't see any complaints. Well, let us get started. So I've been covering a lot of other stuff lately. Yeah, Brother Crow. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, part 2 of his book is coming out at the end of the month. He also got some other things taking place. Oh, and for those who weren't here, if you weren't here when I mentioned it, you have my humble apologies. I videoed the event, but I made a mistake some type of way, and the sound didn't come through at all, like nothing, not a peep. So I recorded video with no sound. It's kind of hard to accidentally do, but I managed to do it. So I just wasn't able to document that properly. So you have my apologies. I'm working on I'm probably going to do some upgrades to the computer, considering what happened Monday. And so I'll let you all know about that and how that goes as well. I'm looking at parts and prices, and let's just say it's not pretty, but it is what it is. So when I get that, I'll let you all know and how much, give you all a rough ballpark if anybody would like to contribute to offset the cost of that. All right, so tonight's discussion, let me get into it. We're going to talk about, there's this belief amongst our people that we have friends. And that belief happens for Black people in America, and Black people on the continent, and Black people in the Caribbean, and so forth and so on. And the reality is that if we had friends, we wouldn't be in the condition that we're in. It's just a simple reality of the situation. And so what I wanted to do is I just wanted to look at one of our non-friends and their plans for Africa. And oh man, I forgot. It's a video I wanted to load up that I didn't load up. But y'all seen it before, but I'll load it up again later. But one thing I wanted to do is go to a piece of history, because a lot of people don't know this. And we're going to look at the Zionist Congress, the Uganda proposal. And this is from 1903. A lot of people, there's a lot of discussion right now, obviously, about Israel and Palestine and who belongs where and whose land is it. Obviously, it's pretty much massacre going on there. It's like there's a massacre going on in the Sudan, which Sudan has a lot of massacres in their history. And obviously in the Congo, which we're not going to get into those today. We'll get into those again because we've talked about them before. But I just want to go into this history because there's a bit of history that is forgotten, and it is relevant to what's going on in the world. So this is from the Jewish Virtual Library, a project of AICE. And it says, when Theodore Herzl, who is considered the father of Zionism, began his quest to establish a homeland for the Jewish people. He sought the support of the great powers to help achieve his goal in 1903. Achieve his goal. In 1903, Herzl turned to Great Britain and met with Joseph Chamberlain, the British colonial secretary, and others high-ranking officials who agreed in principle to Jewish settlement in East Africa. Let's stop right there. Jewish settlement where? Not in what we call the Middle East, not in the Middle West, as Dr. Collar would say, the Middle South, or the Middle North, but in Africa, right? Now, it says at the Sixth Zionist Congress at Basel on August 26, 1903, Herzl proposed the British Uganda program as a temporary refuge for Jews in Russia in immediate danger. By a vote of 295 to 178, it was decided to send an expedition, an investigatory commission, to examine the territory proposed. 3 days later, the British government released an official document allocating a Jewish territory in East Africa on conditions which will enable members to observe their national customs. When Herzl made it clear that this program would not affect the ultimate aim of Zionism, a Jewish entity in the land of Israel, the proposal aroused a storm at the Congress and nearly led to a split in the Zionist movement. The Jewish Territorialist Organization, JTO, was formed as a result of the unification of various groups who had supported Herzl's Uganda proposals during that period from 1903 to 1905. The Uganda program was finally rejected by the Zionist movement at the 7th Zionist Congress in 1905, but Nahum Sirkin and Israel Zangwill called an alternative conference to continue the plan of the Uganda scheme. The fortunes of the territorialist movement depended to no small degree on the quote-unquote seriousness of quote-unquote anti-Semitism on the one hand, and the failure of the political dimension of Zionist activity on the other. So, for example, the movement's ranks swelled somewhat following the pogroms in 1905, but declined considerably after the securing of the Balfour Declaration. Now, let's start right here. So, 1903, there was a proposal between Theodor Herzl, who was basically considered the representative of Zionism, and Britain, to take a part of Africa and make it a refuge for Jewish people, and Jewish people from Europe, European Jews. Mind you, there's nowhere in here that you read that anyone asked any African people anywhere about any of this stuff, right? Now, the reason I brought this up is because this was a serious consideration. And the reality of the situation is that when you're dealing with a people like the people that make up Israel, once the idea that they have claim to a land occurs to them, the idea never leaves. And they feel like they have claims to that land. I mean, that, like, literally, that's what we have going on now. With Gaza and Rafah and all of that. So now we see that the Zionist Congress, some of them, took up a claim of land in East Africa. Now, seeing how they have moved in history since then, how many of us think that they have dismissed that claim and never want to claim anything in Africa again? If you believe that, please put a 1 in the chat. Now, the fortunes of the... Okay, my bad. Zangwill became the movement's undisputed leader, and after the rejection of the Uganda scheme on the grounds of impracticality by the British, Zangwill turned his attention to settlements in Canada and Australia, but opposition from local residents led him to abandon the scheme. Expeditions were sent to Mesopotamia, Iraq, Cyrenaica, Libya, and Angola, with little came from this. A project that had some concrete success was the Galveston scheme, which contemplated the settlement of Jews in the American Southwest, in particular Texas. The project received assistance from Jacob Schiff, the American banker, and some 9,300 Jews in that area between 1907 and 1914 through the Immigration Bureau of the Territorialist Organization. With the publication of the Balfour Declaration, the ITL faced a severe crisis. Many of its members came to the conclusion that the Arabs' Israel was not so utopian after all. The organization's failure was due to its inability to secure a definitive project and its lack of sensitivity towards the historic and traditional settlements of Jewish identity. Right? So, I just wanted to bring that history up because it is often forgotten that the Zionist Congress, members of the Zionist Congress, had their eyes on Africa. And indeed, if we look here, if not considered impractical by the British, and it also not considering, as we talked about earlier, a large amount of funds being placed in the hands of the British to help them win World War I, the Balfour Declaration never takes place, and Black people in Africa would be fighting for freedom right now against Zionists. Right? So that's just something that we need to think about. I need to put on the table. Now, got that out the way, we're going to come back to modern history. 8 years ago, July 8th, 2016. And look what it says. It says Israel's return to Africa. And look who we have here, sitting up here piling around with Netanyahu, who the world right now considers, or many people in the world consider, a genocidal maniac. But here, he looking buddy and like his best buddy in the whole world is good old-fashioned Mr. Ruto of Kenya. In fact, we see the Kenyan flag right there next to the Israeli flag. All right, let's see what this article says, because I haven't read it in a while. I mean, they just look so buddy here. All right, it says this week Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and also I have a video that I saw, and I did not prepare it for this presentation, but I'll find it and I'll put it up. Where it was interesting because they were saying that all of the prime ministers of Israel have changed their name from their European names to names that sound more, this gentleman said, Middle Eastern, right? Now, anyway, back to the article. It says this week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu became the first sitting Israeli head of state to travel to Africa since Yitzhak Rabin went to see Morocco's King Hassan II in 1993. Netanyahu made stops in Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. While in Uganda, he also met with leaders from South Sudan, Tanzania, and Zambia. Although much of the media coverage of the trip has focused on the ceremony at Entebbe, where Netanyahu unveiled a modest monument commemorating the 40th anniversary of the daring rescue by Israeli commandos, of hijacked airline passengers, a raid commanded by the Prime Minister's older brother, Jonathan, who lost his life during the mission. The real story is the significant return of Israel in recent years to a continent that had been virtually closed to it for a long time. Stop right there. So, question we have to ask is that if Africa had been closed to Israel for a long time, they don't say what that long time is. The question we have to ask is why. Well, I'm not sure if the article is going to cover it, but I'll cover it here real quick. One of the reasons why is because for many years, Israel supported the apartheid state in Tanzania, aka South Africa. Thus, for years, like decades, Israel, the Jewish people, supported an apartheid state that was oppressing, and brutalizing and murdering black people. In addition to that, Israel supported the murder of Patrice Lumumba. Right? So, in addition to that, various Israeli and Jewish citizens, people, have had their hand in the exploitation of Africa's resources where fair compensation has not been given. So, that might explain why Africa has been closed to Israel. Let us go back to the article. It says in the 1960s, when many African states achieved independence, Israel was one of the first countries to establish diplomatic relations with them and to offer them assistance. Israel ambassadors operated in 35 countries, and the country was, for a period of time, a major aid donor. Now let's stop right here. Now here's the thing about this. Israel has received major aid from the United States for decades, but somehow they found extra money to quote unquote give aid to African nations. Now we know, because we are studied, we understand that no aid is free. It's just not. There's always a catch to the aid, right? Because we read at least book 1 of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. So we are aware of these things, right? Now, it says that as longtime foreign minister and later Prime Minister Golda Meir acknowledged in her memoirs, did we go into Africa because we wanted votes at the United Nations? Yes, of course that was one of our motivations, and a perfectly honorable one from her perspective, which I never at any time concealed either from myself or from the Africans. But it was far from being the most important motive. Let her tell it. Though it certainly wasn't trivial. Hey, almost telling the truth. The main reason for our African quote unquote adventure was that we had something we wanted to pass on to nations that were even younger and less experienced than ourselves. However, following the Israeli victory in the 1967 Six-Day War, 7 African countries severed their ties with the Jewish state. 23 more broke off relations after the Yom Kippur War in 1973 and the Israeli occupation of the Sinai Peninsula, territory belonging to Egypt, a member of the Organization of African Unity. Subsequently, among African states, only Malawi, Lesotho, and Swaziland kept full diplomatic relations with Israel. In November 1975, the nadir in Israeli-African relations came when 19 African nations voted in favor of the infamous United Nations General Assembly resolution identifying Zionism with racism. Although the measure's sponsors failed to achieve an African consensus when 5 African countries, Cote d'Ivoire, Malawi, Swaziland, and the Central African Republic, voted against the draft, and 16 other African countries abstained. Now, realistically, all African countries should have either abstained or voted against such a resolution, because Zionism and racism, or if we're talking about anti-blackness and the hatred of black people, those two things don't have anything to do with each other than the fact that Zionists hate black people. That's what they have in common. Zionists hate black people. That's just, look, I'm not here to argue with anybody, right? I put up the documentation before. It's not my first rodeo. So let's get back to the article. It says, following the 1978 Camp David Accords, which brought peace with Egypt, Israel has slowly reestablished or established ties with nearly all, quote unquote, I hate this word, sub-Saharan African countries. The exceptions currently being Djibouti, Comoros, Guinea, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Chad, Somalia, and Sudan. But of course, Sudan currently at this moment is in the middle of a civil war. So, so there. Setting off on his visit to East Africa, Netanyahu told his cabinet that Israel intends to return to Africa. Stop right there. Let's think about this for a moment. Before they to Eshun Ogun. The first time that a mass of people who would be considered Israeli citizens in this day and time, but were considered Jews in that day and time, the last time they came here to Africa in mass, well, not the last time, but the first time they came to Africa in mass, those people who identify as Jews, they were funding slave ships, building slave dungeons, and kidnapping some of our people, including taking some to islands off the west coast of Africa and producing offspring that would help enslave our people. For information on that, I suggest reading The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, Volume 2. Not making this stuff up. So, knowing that history, a return to Africa is not necessarily something that I think should be looking forward to, but should definitely keep an eye on and pay very much attention to. Again, this article is from 2016. This is 8 years ago now. He says the diplomatic links have oh, this is written funny. Okay, quote unquote, Netanyahu has very important implications vis-a-vis varying our international alliances and international relations, which are expanding to the major powers in Asia, to Russia, to Latin America, of course, to the African continent. One of the goals of the 5-day trip was to rally support for restoring Israel's observer status in the African Union. Stop. Wait a minute. Let me go forward one little bit, which was revoked in 2002 at the behest of the late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Now let's stop right here. Why, if this is the African Union, the Union of African people, the Union of African states, why in the world does Israel have observer status? They're not part of the African Union. They're not African. They're not even from where they live now. They're from Europe. The vast majority of so-called Jews now, those who claim they are Jews, are Ashkenazim, which means they come from the Eastern and Central European region. These are just facts. This is not debatable. So why would those people who are from there have observer status in the African Union, which is the descended from the OAU, the Organization of African Unity? But I digress. The proposal that garnered support from several of Netanyahu's hosts including Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta, who described it as not just good for Kenya, but also good for Africa and good for global peace. The Kenyan leader cited the common interest that his country and its neighbors had with Israel in combating Islamist terrorism. In fact, Israel will be helping Kenya build a 440-mile wall along its border with Somalia to prevent al-Shabaab and other militants from crossing that frontier. Kenyatta also announced an agreement between the two nations to share intelligence. Let's start right here. So, as much as I'm going to talk bad about Mr. Ruto, before I do that, we see that there's a long-standing, but not long-standing, but there's a recent history of cooperation, for lack of a better word, between Israel and Kenya that spans multiple leaders at this point. Now let's think about this. As real black gentlemen, it's like, what in the world? Israel worked with Kenya to build a wall dividing two African nations. Take all the time you need to process the information that I have provided. I mean, this is literally the divide and conquer strategy with an actual physical artifice representing the strategy. Let us move forward. On a similar vein, Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn, of Ethiopia, not only promised to work to upgrade Israel's position at the African Union. Wait, come on, man, hold up. Come on, Ethiopia. What are we doing here? Yeah. All right. I have Ethiopian people I'm cool with, had some Ethiopian people I've worked with that I'm cool with for a while, and literally at multiple jobs now that I think about it. Wait, what are we doing? Ethiopia, like seriously, what are we? This is the same. This the same Israel. Y'all correct me if I'm wrong. This the same Israel that sterilized Ethiopian Jews in Ethiopia, that beat and brutalized some Ethiopian Jews and some other black Jews, right? Didn't want them to come in, say they weren't Jewish and all this other stuff. And yet here's Ethiopia promising to upgrade Israel's position at the African Union. What are we doing? Somebody explain it to me. Get Ethiopia on the horn. These people have committed genocide against Ethiopian people who happen to be in Israel, and you, the leader, the prime minister at the time, I'm not sure who the prime minister now is, I should have looked it up, but I didn't, are going to help the same genocidal maniacs to upgrade their position in the African Union. They're not even African. Like, this is the type of bootlicking that I'm talking about. These type of leaders, I'm saying this to my African brothers and sisters that envy all who may be listening. I'm just gonna keep it 100, because we've seen it. We live it. When you have these type of bootlickers, these type of sycophants, these type of people who absolutely, just lick the dirty boots of our enemies. When those people are leading you, you got to find a way. You got to move them out the way by any means necessary. I say that humbly and with respect, because these people will lead you down the garden path to extermination. It makes my stomach hurt, my eyes hurt reading this stuff. All right, excuse me. Now, the East African Corridor has huge potential for cooperation with Israel, and we need to engage Israel. Adding that to those African countries who disagree with Israel on certain issues had no right to veto the rest of the continent's cooperation with the Jewish state. False. That's false. If other African nations see that you're dealing with an enemy, they have the right to say, this is an enemy. and identify the enemy as such. They have the right to do that. In fact, they have the duty to do that. Because the duty of the civilized man is to teach what? Civilization. Also, it's your job to speak to warn the wicked man from his wicked ways so that he can save his life. Right? Now, and this, the Ethiopian leader also publicly thanked Israel for support in securing Africa's second most populous country, a rotating seat on the UN Security Council beginning next year, and promised to reciprocate by helping Israel in international forums. See, there's some, what they call it, quid pro quo. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. This is probably, I wonder if this is how Tedros got on with the World Health Organization. Yeah, I need to research that, because Tedros seemed to come out of nowhere, and he's doing the bidding of the World Health Organization, and now he's the face of it. So when everybody gets mad, and when everybody hates what the World Health Organization is doing, and when everybody questions the World Health Assembly Treaty and all this stuff, and when everybody says that they're trying to take away country sovereignty, who do they see? Do they see the people behind the scenes? No, they see basically an Ethiopian Negro. So when something goes wrong, they're gonna what? Blame black people. Again, we have to stop being so just so eager to do the bidding of our enemies, man. You got to stop being slaves. It's absolutely disgusting. Be before they straight black pride doing a straight black sock. Now, in fact, although it's gone largely unremarked, better relations with African nations have contributed concretely to Israel's diplomatic success, like the failure in September 2015 of the proposed International Atomic Energy Resolution that would have mandated inspections of Israel's nuclear. Oh, come on, man. Just every line I read, every paragraph gets worse and worse. So, the International Atomic Energy Agency had a resolution that would have mandated inspection of Israel's nuclear facilities so we could know what type of nukes they have, how many nukes they have, do they have stuff that they haven't claimed, so forth and so on. But what happened? 4 African nations voted against the measure. Burundi, Kenya again, Rwanda, and Togo. Bruh. Kenya and Rwanda. Anyway, 17 others abstained. 8 were absent. And only 7 voted against Israel. I would like to know the 7 so we can give them a big up. So basically, 17 abstained. So 25 countries, they just bammed out. Like they just went out like some suckers. Like they didn't want to vote on it or say anything. They just disappeared conveniently. Goodness. Beyond the political stakes, there are also increasing economic and commercial ties between Israel and its African partners, as underscored by the representatives of more than 50 Israeli firms who accompanied Netanyahu on the trip. In fact, in many cases, the investments made by Israeli businesses, especially in the water, agriculture, energy, and information technology sectors of several of Africa's emerging economies, helped pave the way for the renewal of diplomatic cooperation. In Rwanda, for example, an Israeli-American company, Gigawatt Global, is behind a year-old solar power plant that boosted the country's generation capacity by 6%, providing efficient renewable energy to 15,000 homes. The plant, East Africa's first utility-scale photovoltaic facility, was a finalist for 2015 U.S. Secretary of State's Awards for corporate excellence in the category of environmental sustainability. I'm just going to ask a silly question. With 53 African nations, 54 African nations? I think 54 now. Um, we have 54 African nations. Now, all the African nations aren't headed by African people. I get that. And so let's say 43 black African nations. Out of 43 black African nations, none of them could come up with a plan for a solar power plant that would give energy to 15,000 homes. I'm just asking the question. I mean, look, not to sound arrogant, but is 15,000 homes? Are y'all impressed by that? Like we got a whole continent of people, and we can't come up with the idea and come up with the plans and come up with a way to build this thing so that we have more than 15,000 homes that have electricity. I mean, parts of Africa is literally sitting on the equator and get sun all the time. We have people, I mean, brilliant African people with tremendous engineering skills. We got African people with tremendous amount of money, like phenomenal wealth. We couldn't do this, or we can't. Can we inspect it and reverse engineer it so we don't need them anymore? I mean, I got questions. Somebody help me out here. Like, do we really need these people in our business? And let's finish the article. Man, Israeli official development agencies as well as private charities, which means NGOs, have also ramped activities in Africa. Since it was founded 8 years ago, the Israeli nonprofit Innovation Africa has used solar and water technologies to deliver clean water to nearly 1 million rural villagers in 7 African countries. The Democratic Republic of Congo, of course, they're just economically just plundering the place while this is going on. But don't let that confuse you. Ethiopia, Malawi, Senegal, Tanzania, and Uganda. In 2012, a unique partnership was launched between the Ethiopian Ministry of Agriculture and USAID. Wasn't Mr. Fauci part of USAID at one time? Y'all help me out, or am I tripping? Because if Mr. Fauci was part of USAID and your country is working with USAID, you are setting up your people for genocide. Just the thought makes my head hurt. Israel Agency for International Cooperation, Cashapp, to promote economic growth in rural areas by strengthening small holders' production of fruits and vegetables with market potential. 2016, the tripartite development program built on an earlier bilateral Israeli-Ethiopian initiative was extended for another 3 years. Kind of reminds me of a low-level trilateral condition. Like none of these things that I'm reading, look, maybe it's me. Hot, tired, irritated. And reading this article is not helping any of those things. It's aggravating all of those conditions. Following his meeting with Netanyahu, Rwandan President Paul Kagame, whose country has had since 2014 a partnership agreement with Israel, establishing a form of regular consultations between the two countries and boosting investment, mentioned several areas which were ripe for future cooperation. There are new areas as we go forward, such as water management. Israel had a lot of capacity that not only Rwanda but the rest of Africa can benefit from. Israel manages scarcity of water resources better than anyone in the world. Israel has made huge advancements in areas of technology of agriculture that has multiplied the productivity better than you can see anywhere else. Let's start right here. You want to know who was managing water pretty well that Africa could have, talked to? Muammar Gaddafi. I'm not a fan of Muammar Gaddafi, but Muammar Gaddafi tapped the underground river that's underneath the desert, right? And was utilizing that to help feed his people and set up power plants and all that stuff. It's part of what is going on, along with his gold dinar project. So we talking about people like the man found a river in the desert. You know what I'm saying? And of course, people don't understand that the Sahara Desert is not an eternal thing. That area of the world used to be a grassland a long time ago, because it's part of the 25,800 year approximate cycle, which is like in which the climate changes and the seas rise and fall, and different places that are normally hot become mild, and mild become hot, and all of these things. So when you hear them talking about climate change, it's actually part of a natural progression that happens over thousands of years, and that cycle has been going on for a long time. And our ancient Kemetic ancestors identified it and called it Zep Tepi, but that is another discussion. Now, let's just say, now that we've looked at that situation between Israel and Africa, I want to play this video clip that talks about the hidden aspect of the relationship between Israel and Africa, and talks about things that we don't often hear in the news or part of history. So hold on while I load up that clip.
Army in the world. But if you simply take a closer look at their actions across the African continent, you'll get a completely different story. Israel has been facilitating destabilization through military efforts across the continent since the 60s. Let's first take a look at the Congo. Israel was supportive of the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, who was first prime minister after they gained their independence. Lumumba wanted to unite Africa and have them be less dependent on their former colonizers. Now, while it was the US and Belgium who were responsible for Lumumba's death at only 36 years old, it was Israel who then helped them back Mobutu Sese Seko, an intensely corrupt leader who was willing to be a puppet for the West. They gave Seko huge amounts of money and arms to maintain the violence needed for Western mineral extraction, and Israel's special interest of the minerals needed to create the weapons they rely on, like the weapons used right now to commit a genocide against the Palestinian people. To date, Israel still trains the militia responsible for the violence and enslavement of the Congolese people. They too are experiencing a genocide. In Nigeria in the late 1960s, Israel meddled in the Nigerian Biafran War by giving assistance to both sides. And they did this knowing full well that the Nigerian military were committing atrocities against the Biafran people who wanted their independence. They gave the Biafrans $200,000 to buy weapons, and they gave Nigeria their equipment to ferry in soldiers, bombs, ammunition, and other supplies to their front lines. That would be like going to a boxing match and betting on both fighters. Fast forward to the 90s, the Rwandan Civil War, the fastest paced genocide in human history, where 1 million people died at only 100 days. Israel was one source that provided the Hutus with weapons to massacre the Tutsis. They sent weapons to a country where they already knew a genocide was taking place, and a significant amount of the fighting now in the Congo that allows the enslavement of the Congolese people and exploitation of the land is being committed by M23. And who are M23? Well, they are the militia made up of ethnic Tutsis who were genocided in the 90s with the help of Israel. I've only mentioned 3 countries. There's also Angola, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Kenya, Morocco, South Sudan, Uganda, Guinea, and my very own Ghana. Israel is not the most moral army in the world, but they just might be the most morally corrupt army in the world.
All right, shout out to that sister for that wonderful report. When I find the link to that, I'll put the link in the description so you can watch the whole program. I found that information invaluable because it lets us know that despite what African leaders think or are saying, um, yeah, these are not our friends. It's interesting. Read this real quick. It says after wrapping up his week with an address in Parliament in which he invoked King Solomon and Queen of Sheba, Netanyahu tweeted, "Israel's coming back to Africa, and Africa is coming back to Israel." All I'm gonna say is, you've been warned. You've been warned. This is not our friend. This is an enemy. So let's get to our next article. Let's see if this is it. All right. Read a little bit of this quickly. It says Israel's diplomatic offensive in Africa. The tour initiated by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Africa in 2016 and his participation at the June 2017 51st Summit of the Economic Community of States of West Africa, ECOWAS, in Monrovia marked the return of Israel to the African continent. Stop right here. Why? I mean, what's the word? This is a rhetorical question. But why in the world? Why is ECOWAS uniting with Israel? Why did they invite them to the 51st summit of ECOWAS? Why? What benefit is it for those African states in that region to have Israel come in and say, can we just be realistic here? People who look like Benjamin Netanyahu are involved in enslavement of Black people, involved in colonialism, involved in neocolonialism, involved in stealing resources from Africa, involved in brutalization, assassination of leaders. I mean, everything you can think of that we faced, that we fought against, that has happened on the African continent and to Black people around the world. It's people that look like Netanyahu who have done it. So the idea of bringing in people who look like Netanyahu to see what we're doing, what we're planning, what we're building, what we're strategizing, has got to be one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard in my life. And the fact that these people are leaders of nations and they're doing this type of thing, I'm just flabbergasted and dumbfounded. So excuse me for rambling on and on, because the more I think about it, the more ridiculous it is. I just don't understand. I don't get it. I need somebody to explain it to me. Maybe it's over my head. Maybe I'm not sophisticated enough to understand the stratagem. But this, to me, is a ridiculous idea. Let us get back to the article. It says for 2 years, and despite the failure of the Israel Africa Summit in Lomé, Togo in 2017, Israel offers the African capitals its services in all domains, agribusiness, energy, security, telephony, and intends to strengthen its presence on the continent by considering the closure of some diplomatic relations abroad in the next 3 years with countries like Paraguay, Belarus, Dominican Republic, and Ireland, and Israel's consulate in Latvia in order to open new ones in Africa. Beyond traditional economic and security cooperation with African chancelleries, Tel Aviv seeks to secure African votes in the United Nations concerning the Palestinian issue. Stop right there. Again, we get back to the same point. The same point Golda Meir had 60 years ago, in 1967, almost 60 years ago. Now, 7 years ago, so 50 years after that, Israel's trying to get Africans to side with them against Palestinians. Now, let's be honest. I deal with reality, right? Let's be honest. Do we have problems with Palestinians? Maybe not Palestinians, particularly BB48 our wonderful producer, Cindy Ashby. But yeah, I mean, we have, I'm still reading Islam's a Black Slave. Right? Still. So we have problems with Arabs. There's no doubt about that. But the part of the history that nobody talks about is not only were those who say they're Jews involved in the so-called transatlantic slave trade and very much helped fund it, but have been involved in the trans-Sahara or Islamic slave trade, if you will, for hundreds of years. I bet you bet you didn't say that part at the ECOWAS meeting. You got no answers for that, do you? You're gonna claim? I'm sure he would claim those were the Sephardic Jews and that he didn't have anything to do with that. See, when you making quote unquote alliances with people, you got to understand the history of your interaction with the people that you're trying to make the alliance with. You have to be able to identify friend from foe, your near enemy and your far enemy, your traditional foe and your new foe, right? China would be a new foe. But part of China's attitude towards Black people stems from the fact that some of their earliest interactions that they remember came with Black people who were enslaved via the what? The Islamic slave trade, who the Jews had a hand in. Right? So, let us get back to the article. It says, however, Tel Aviv also wishes to create strategic alliances on the continent in order to counter Iranian influence. This note examines the different aspects of Israel's diplomatic offensive in Africa and the way Tel Aviv is preparing its return on the continent around issues such as the fight against terrorism and insecurity. Stop right here. We have to understand geopolitically what benefits us and what does not. Is terrorism a problem on the continent? To a degree. Yes. More so than now. But are we sure that the people that you're trying to make an alliance with don't have a hand in creating the terrorism that you're trying to fight against? Because some of the people you're trying to fight against are allegedly, quote unquote, ISIS cells. We've talked about in our YouTube short who originally was ISIS. ISIS was originally the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Make of that what you will. Go to the YouTube shorts. They'll tell you. 30 years ago. So, I mean, are you sure you're not? Got to do the research, make sure that you're not making a deal with the terrorists to fight terrorism. I'm just saying. All right. So, now that we laid that foundation, let's move up to now. Look what we have here. White House state dinner. Obama and other stars woo Kenya's Ruto. We have Mr. Ruto here with Mr. Biden. Not sure that Mr. Biden actually knows where he is in this picture because you can never really be sure with Mr. Biden. One thing that Ruto just, I'm going to be honest. My least favorite African leader was the dude in Ghana. I just really, he just had got on my nerves to the point where just looking at him makes me want to throw up. But Ruto's coming, he's in second place and moving ahead quickly. Now, remember when I talked about leadership and I gave an outline on leadership, how to recognize good leadership and bad leadership? Understand this picture right here, where you piling around and keying it up and kissing the feet of people like this, that's bad leadership. But let's read the article. It says the White House pulled out all of the stops for Kenya's President William Ruto and his wife Rachel with a state dinner that included celebrity guests, a succulent menu, and electric performances. Interesting. U.S. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden ensured no expense was spared in honoring Kenya, one of their closest allies in quote-unquote sub-Saharan Africa. The Kenyan first couple were accompanied by 3 of their daughters and were all pictured on a red carpet ahead of the evening's entertainments as seen above. State dinners are organized by the First Lady and her staff and involve much pomp and circumstance. The invitation lists menu, flowers, all pink orchids, and red roses for Thursday, and table settings are all meticulously planned. Oh, look, some of my people that I hate, like the least, excuse me. Kamala Harris. Y'all know I can't stand Jill Biden as well. I got a video on her. Anyway, who are these people? I don't know who these people are. So anyway, the black tie event was a star-studded affair with celebrities from the screen, such as Black Panther actress Denai Guerrera, who is from Zimbabwe, and LeVar Burton, who made his name playing Kunta Kinte in Roots. Come on, LeVar Burton. I'm trying to I thought you was cool. I guess I'm wrong. Oh, look, it's Barack Hussein Obama. Former President Bill Clinton was there with his wife Hillary, and ex-President Barack Obama, whose father was Kenyan, swooped in with a surprise appearance. Minnesota politician Ilhan Omar, who is from Somalia, was also in attendance. And I just found out that she's married to a small hat. So all this that she's against, all this stuff where she's supposed to be one of these rebellious new politicians and going against the grain and all that. That's all a show. It's all a farce. Who is that? That's Hillary. That's y'all know how I feel about Al Sharpton. Anyway, there's Omar with Tim Minot, that's a hat. Says the mouth-watering menu, which primarily showcased American cuisine, leaving little room for Kenyan food, included short ribs, lobster, and corn. So no matter where you are as a black person, they're gonna make sure to break out some ribs. I guess they just didn't want to break out the chicken because it would just be it would be just too ridiculous. America's influence on the African continent has been waning in recent years, with countries moving towards China, Russia, and Iran. But during this trip, the East African nation has been given the status of non-NATO ally by the U.S. In his toast, President Ruto said, "We proudly take a firm stance, shoulder to shoulder, for democracy in a world where troubles have shaken the faith of men." I mean, he just having a good old time. Look at this. Who is that? Brad Paisley. Anybody know who that is? And the gospel choir of Howard University. Of course, you got to have somebody from Howard. This might have been a nod to President Ruto, who not only likes country music, but is Kenya's first evangelical Christian. You know what? That explains it. I don't have to read any further. That explains it all. I mean, this dude is just. Hey, what'd you say, brother? Yeah, a bunch of Zionists and race traders. Yeah. Man, goodness gracious. This was an event for you. So, what I want to do, because I got another video, I just got to remind people, including any Kenyan people, what the history of Western people is in Kenya. This is just one of the things, because I have put this in a lecture years ago. But I got to play this as a reminder, because obviously the president has forgotten. This is crazy. The more I look at this, the more I'm just like, what in the world is going on? All right, check this out.
With a row that now threatens to derail the government's ongoing tetanus vaccination.
Yes, the Catholic Church has stepped up its opposition to the exercise, dismissing it as a population control tool.
Doctors allied to the Catholic Church in Kenya are now warning women of reproductive age against taking the vaccine, saying it could render them sterile.
Or could it? Well, KTN's Wilkester Nyabwa begins our news coverage with that story.
In 3 days, public health officials will finish administering the third dose of tetanus vaccines. But the complaints that have marred the exercise are likely to echo long after they are gone. The loudest voice that of leaders from the Catholic Church who have urged followers to boycott vaccines.
In the current tetanus vaccine, the Catholic Church advises all Kenyans not to participate in the vaccination program.
The anti-tetanus drive is part of a 5-dose campaign that targets women of childbearing age. The first round of vaccinations took place in September last year and the second in March this year. The third round has aroused the suspicion of Catholic doctors who claim that the tetanus injections could cause sterility in women.
Is there a tetanus crisis in Kenya? If this is so, why has it not been declared? Why does the campaign target women of 14 and 49 years? Why has the campaign left out girls below 14 and yet girls between 13 and 9 years become pregnant if what they are worried about is neonatal tetanus? Why have they left out boys and men knowing they are all prone to tetanus even more than women?
When anybody then says in a country dying of malaria, dying of HIV, dying of cancer, dying of diabetes, and you prioritize a disease that some of us have not seen.
The Catholic Doctors Association of Kenya claims to have undertaken independent tests to back the allegations.
When injected to a non-pregnant woman, combined with the tetanus toxoid, she develops antibodies against both tetanus and HCG. When she conceives, the body fails to recognize HCG as a friend and will produce anti-HCG antibodies, destroying her own natural HCG, rendering her incapable of sustaining a pregnancy.
This is not the first time the government has been accused of using vaccinations as a permanent population control tool. In some parts of the country, health workers administering repeat polio vaccines have faced opposition. The government maintains that the tetanus vaccines are geared towards reducing the chances of mothers transmitting tetanus to their newborns. The standoff is now likely to jeopardize plans to proceed with the 4th and 5th rounds of tetanus vaccinations across the country. Wilkester Nyabwa, KTN.
Now, the first time I played that, I don't know how many years ago, when I did one of my lectures. Like I said, it's an oldie but a goodie. Also, the United States State Department did a study on I believe it was Kenya. They did a study on Kenyan males and talking about why they were so masculine. right? And running that toxic masculinity game. So this is just the history, a small bit of history of the West in Kenya. And Mr. Ruto was up here listening to Brad Paisley and talking about he likes country music. I mean, if your leader is a traitor, you need a new leader. Respectfully. So all my Kenyan brothers and sisters out there, look, listen. We have experience with Negroes leading us to destruction. I mean, one of them was there. It was Al Sharpton. He was there. Right? Confidential informant, Al Sharpton. CI number 7, Al Sharpton. Right? So we know all about that. So don't, I'm going to just tell you this. Don't make the mistake that we've made when you see your leaders laying up with the enemy. That's politically. If you actually see them laying up with the enemy, then that's even more to take charge. Right? Now, let us move on to, I think, is this the one? I think this is it. Let me see. Here we go. Alrighty. U.S. military says it has light footprint in Africa. These documents show a vast network of bases. This is from The Intercept. This is from a few years ago. It's from 2018. It says at least 34 U.S. military bases are scattered across Africa with high concentrations in Northwest and the Horn of Africa. Let's stop right here. There are what? We're going to go with 54 African countries. The U.S. has an estimated 34 bases in Africa, nearly one military base per country. How many people think it's a good idea for a bunch of African nations to allow the United States to have military bases in their country? Y'all put a 1 in the chat. Goodness. Anyway, let's read part of this. Oh, y'all didn't remind me that I didn't turn the music back on. Wondering why it's so quiet in here. Music, please. There we go. Oops. I messed up. My bad. It says the U.S. military has long insisted that it maintains a light footprint in Africa, and there have been several reports of proposed drawdowns in special operations forces and closures of outposts on the continent, due to a 2017 ambush in Niger and an increasing focus on rivals like China and Russia. But through it all, the U.S. Africa Command has fallen short in providing concrete information about its bases on the continent, leaving in question the true scope of America's presence there. I wonder why. Documents obtained from AFRICOM by The Intercept via the Freedom of Information Act, however, offer a unique window into the sprawling network of U.S. military outposts in Africa, including the previously undisclosed or unconfirmed sites in hotspots like Libya, Niger, and Somalia. The Pentagon also told The Intercept that troop reductions in Africa will be modest and phased in over several years, and that no outposts are expected to close as a result of personality cuts. How many outposts were they expecting to close? Absolutely zero. According to a 2018 briefing by AFRICOM science advisor Peter E. Thiel, the military's constellation of bases include 34 sites scattered across the continent, with high concentrations in the north and west, as well as the Horn of Africa. These regions, not surprisingly, have also seen numerous U.S. drone attacks and low-profile commando raids in recent years. For example, Libya, the site of drone and commando missions, but for which President Donald Trump said he saw no U.S. military role just last year, is nonetheless home to 3 previously undisclosed outposts. That's I don't know whether Trump was doing what politicians do Or this one of those things where somebody tells him, oh no, man, you don't have to worry about that. Nah, we don't have that stuff there. And then he goes out and tell people. And then when he leaves the room, they're like, all right, so man, call out people on that base. You know what I'm saying? you know, it reminds me of the movie, what was the movie? Independence Day, where the president's like, ah, man, that's ridiculous. There are no aliens. And then, somebody's like, well, Mr. President, he's like, well, what? You know what I'm saying? Reminds me of that movie, man. And these politicians are sitting around saying stuff. And meanwhile, a whole different thing is happening. But anyway, let's move forward. According to the 2018, oh, my bad, already read that. U.S. Africa Command's posture plan is designed to secure strategic access to key locations on a continent characterized by vast distances and limited infrastructure. That's interesting. Because that's almost, the way he states that, it's almost a strategic advantage for Africa to have limited infrastructure, because it means that it would be hard for even a power as great as the United States to be able to conquer and hold vast amounts of territory. So that's a the very nature of the land of Africa. It's a strategic advantage for our people, and I don't even think we think of it that way. Like we don't get it. Let me take a moment to state the obvious. Black people worldwide have been under assault for 6,000 years. And we have yet to accept, at least in modern time, we have yet to accept the declaration of war from our enemies. Greetings to Sister Nefertaria, and before they straight black pride to Sister Farnessa. We have to, at some point, understand that many people around the world would, in the least, like to enslave black people wherever they find them, and at worst, eliminate us. Like, what part of the last 6,000 years proves me wrong? Like, I just don't understand why we don't understand that we are not. Let me say this. We are not in a time of fighting oppression. We are in a time of fighting extinction. Just got to get that off my chest. I got to say that so that no one is confused about where we are. B40 to 777-9311, right? And so when you are facing possible extinction, despite the fact that you have the youngest population on the continent, despite the fact that there are approximately 1.25 to 1.5 billion people, if you don't resist, that means you just die a slow and horrible death instead of a quick one. But I digress. Now, according to Adam Moore, an assistant professor of geography at the University of California, Los Angeles, and is an expert of the U.S. military's presence in Africa, it is getting harder for the U.S. military to plausibly claim that it has a light footprint in Africa. In just the past 5 years, it has established what is perhaps the largest drone complex in the world in Djibouti, Shabelle, which is involved in wars on two continents, Yemen and Somalia. Moore also noted that the U.S. is building an even larger drone base in Agadez, Niger. Certainly for people living in Somalia, Niger, Djibouti, the notion that the U.S. is not militarizing in those countries rings false. For the last 10 years, AFRICOM has not only sought to define its presence as limited in scope, but its military outposts as small, temporary, and little more than local bases where Americans are tenants. For instance, this is how Waldhauser described a low-profile drone outpost in Tunisia last year. It's not our base, quote unquote. It's the Tunisians' base. Sure, if you say so. On a visit to a U.S. facility in Senegal this summer, the AFRICOM chief took pains to emphasize that the U.S. had no intentions of establishing a permanent base there. Still, there's no denying the scope of AFRICOM's network of outposts, nor the growth in infrastructure. Air Forces Africa alone, the command's air component, has recently completed or is currently working on nearly 30 construction projects across 4 countries in Africa. The U.S. footprint on the African continent has grown markedly over the last decade to promote U.S. security interests on the continent. Let me say this. History has shown us that there was a time where there were some so-called temporary outposts in Africa. They became slave dungeons. That's what they became. I just want to remind people of that. Right? Let me see. Oh, you got ripped off? Okay. Yeah, I wasn't paying attention. I'll have to check into that. Yeah, I'm not sure. And maybe that's probably something on my end. I'll check into that. Now, what I want to do real quick is, well, let me read a little more of this article, then I get to it. While China, France, Russia, and the United Arab Emirates have increased their own military engagement in Africa, in recent years, a number of countries now possess outposts on the continent. None approach the wide-ranging U.S. footprint. China, for example, has just one base in Africa, a facility in Djibouti. According to documents obtained by the Intercept through the Freedom of Information Act, AFRICOM's network of bases includes larger enduring outposts, consisted of forward operating sites or FOCs, never seen that, and cooperative security locations or CSLs. Man, the military, they love their acronyms. As well as more numerous austere sites known as contingency locations or CLs. All of these are located on the African continent, except for the foci on Britain's Ascension Island in the South Atlantic. Teal's map of AFRICOM's strategic posture names the specific locations of all 14 focis and CSLs and provide country-specific locales for the 20 contingency locations. The Pentagon would not say whether the tally was exhaustive, however, citing concerns about publicly providing the number of forces deployed to specific facilities in individual countries. For reasons of operational security, complete and specific force laydowns are not releasable, said Mr. Tresh. While troops and outposts periodically come and go from the continent, some locations used by commandos conducting sensitive missions are likely kept under wraps. Teal's map represents the most current and complete accounting available and indicates the areas of the continent of greatest concerns to U.S. Africa Command. The distribution of bases suggests that the U.S. military is organized around 3 counter-terrorism theaters: the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Djibouti, Kenya, Libya, and the Sahel, with Cameroon, Chad, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. Says more, noting that the U.S. has only one base in the south of the continent and scaled back engagement in Central Africa in recent years. Stop right here. Libya is in the current state it's in because, and here's our map here, is in the current state that it's in because of Hillary Clinton's actions, right? Which led to the destruction of the Libyan government, which led to an uptick and a reestablishment of enslavement of African people by Libyans, right? Those of you who have seen my Africa versus Everybody lecture, you've seen the video of an actual slave market and the selling of black people in Libya, recorded by, I can't even remember what news service that was. So we can blame directly Hillary Clinton and the United States for enslavement of black people, which is still going on in Libya to this day. But Mr. Ruto is kicking it and kikiing with these folks who are responsible for the enslavement of black people in Northern Africa. Now, I don't even want to read any more of this article. Let me just get to the brass tacks here. If we think that we cannot get re-enslaved or recolonized, we got another thing coming. So what I'm going to do is there's no need to believe me. There's no need to believe me. You know, I'm just a guy on the internet talking. We're going to bring the European to the witness stand so he can tell us what he thinks.
Few years, I don't know if it's 10 years or less or more, we will have the obligation to return and help these African countries. It is not China, Russia and Wagner who will bring sustainable solutions to the very great difficulties that these African countries and their populations face. In a recent announcement, the former Chief of Staff of the French armies, General François Gérard Marie Lecointre, has stated that France and Europe are planning a military recolonization of Africa over the next decade. This controversial statement has sparked outrage and debate among Pan-Africanists. The idea of recolonizing Africa may seem absurd and outdated in the 21st century, but General Lecointre believes that it is necessary for France and Europe to regain their influence and power in the African continent. He argues that Africa is a crucial source of resources and energy for Europe, and that it is essential to secure these resources through military intervention and control. A continent that is going to experience a demographic explosion like no other continent has ever experienced. And so, imagine that this happens in the next 10-20 years, and that it will have no consequences on Europe. The general's statement has been met with criticism from many Africans, who see it as a blatant attempt to exploit and dominate our countries once again. Africa is not a playground for European powers. Furthermore, the idea of recolonization goes against the principles of democracy and self-determination, which are the cornerstones of modern international relations. Why not face this reality and stand by the rules and laws that they are creating? It is important for African nations to have autonomy over their own affairs, rather than being subject to the whims of foreign powers. This happened in the past and it shouldn't happen again. At least, not now that our eyes are wide open. While some may argue that it is necessary for securing resources and maintaining influence, the majority see it as a violation of African sovereignty and an attempt to re-establish colonial domination. Ultimately, it is up to us and the non-puppet leaders to decide our own fate and determine the best path forward for our people. Subscribe, drop a like, and share this video with others for this awareness to spread. Support the channel by tipping a super thanks of any amount of your choice.
Now, it gets no clearer than that, right? The Frenchman said what he had to say. Now, I didn't record. Try to find my music. I didn't bring up the video for Eric Prince, but Eric Prince said the same thing. So you have two different Europeans, a Frenchman and an American, both saying that it's time to recolonize Africa. Right? So if that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is. So the question is, what is it that the Europeans want? Well, one of the things they want the resources. Of course, we know that. But one of the other things they want, it has nothing to do with the resources, is they want to bend over Africa. And I know you're like, DC, what in the world are you talking about? Well, let's take a look at it. U.S. threatens to pull aid to Ghana over anti-LGBTQ bill. Says the U.S. warned Thursday that it could restrict foreign aid to Ghana if the African nation's president signs into law a new bill criminalizing Rainbow Mafia. Ghana's parliament on Wednesday passed legislation that would impose up to 3 years in prison for identifying as LGBT. Y'all got all the letters, man. Reading that stuff makes me tired. As I'm sitting here looking for a video that I apparently did not load up. Anyway, Ghana's parliament on Wednesday passed legislation that would impose up to 3 years in prison for identifying as part of the rainbow community and a 5-year term for forming and funding rainbow groups. See, now that's actually excellent, because see, what happens is if you just impose it on the people, you won't stop it because the money still comes in. And the reality of the situation is that the reason a lot of people on the continent are getting involved in these activities is because they're paid to. They're paying the young people in these African nations to get involved in these activities, right? And there's, of course, as we know, when I say young people, I mean young people, because there is, of course, some pedo, because it's homophilia and all that it entails, right? So that is, as we see from this article, a major thing. And it's not just here, as we will see, I think. Hold on. All right, yeah. Says the U.S. provided more than $211 million in assistance to Ghana in the fiscal year of 2022, with the money supporting a variety of sectors like agriculture and efforts to combat malaria and HIV or AIDS. Now, here's the thing. We know, right, that Hillary Kaprowski and his vaccine program helped set the stage for the explosion of HIV and AIDS in Africa in the first place. So the people that started the problem, right, are the people that you are going to give you the solution. My goodness, my. Anyway, and then $211 million is nothing compared. Like, Ukraine got $61 billion. Israel got 11 billion, and to be honest, Israel can get anything they want all the time. That 11 billion, that's just what's above board. So this is a pittance compared to what they're giving to these other countries. It's unclear how much money would be halted in response to the law. Many African countries criminalize same-sex activity, but recently legislatures have moved to strengthen such laws across the continent. Sam George, a Ghanaian parliamentarian who sponsored the legislation, wrote online that it took 3 years to pass the bill. Our values would be protected and defended so long as we have a voice, he wrote. The legislation brought swift condemnation from the United States, which is Western Israel, swift condemnation from Western Israel, in the same vein of criticism it leveled against Uganda over the past year for a similar but much harsher measure. Ghana's tradition of tolerance and peace and respect for human rights is a source of stability and prosperity that has long served as a model for countries around the globe, Miller said in a statement. This legislation is inconsistent with the values and will, if it becomes law, undermine a laudable tradition. Let's stop right here. A long time ago on this program, we pointed out that the quote-unquote human rights is just a code word for homophilia. What about African rights? The rights of African people to be African. No one cares about those rights, because African rights and human rights aren't the same thing, because quote-unquote human rights is homophilia. and African rights is black man, black woman, and black child. That's what's right for black people to exist and to continue to exist. Alrighty. My bad. Uganda's law, which includes the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality, life imprisonment for the offense of homosexuality, and criminalizes the promotion of homosexuality with up to 20 years. Washington recently restricted $20 million of aid it provided Uganda in response to the law. Now let's be honest here. $20 million. Let's start right here. If we African people worldwide were organized, do we not have people that could make this? We have people. There's people on the continent who are billionaires. They could literally just drop off a check for $20 million and be like, "We heard y'all got a hole in your budget. Here you go." We could take the top 20 NBA players, the top 20 MLB players, and the top 20 NFL players of African descent. What's that, 60 people? And have them drop off probably $250,000 or so and replace that money. It's not that we don't have the money. We're not organized. We don't know what's going on, and some of us don't see ourselves as African. Whether it's people here or people in South America, Central America. Like, you think black people here are Negroes? Try to convince a black Dominican that he's black. Good luck with that. Don't forget to guard your grill when you do it. Amnesty International called on Akufo-Addo, who, I mean, that dude just soft as charming. That's absolutely disgusting, to not sign the legislation and to respect human rights of all persons. The Parliament's passing of the so-called draconian bill is shocking and deeply disappointing, coming shortly after Ghana was elected to serve at the United Nations Human Rights Council. That's so hilarious. Genevieve Partington, who asked you? Amnesty's country director for Ghana, said in a statement. Rainbow people have already reported forced evictions, loss of jobs, increased violence, and other violations of rights guaranteed by the country's constitution since the bill was introduced. Well, black people have suffered forced evictions, loss of jobs, increased violence, and other violations ever since the Constitution was written, but I don't see nobody talking about that part. Anyway, let us move on. So we see here that, again, one of the things they want to do is bend over Africans. Now, you're going to say, all right, DC, that's one country, man, but that ain't got nothing to do with, okay, never mind. UK government said it is appalled at Uganda's anti-homosexuality bill. All right, the British government said on Monday it was appalled, quote unquote, at the Ugandan government's new anti-sexuality law, adding that it is firmly opposed to the death penalty in all circumstances, which is, of course, a lie. They weren't opposed to the death penalty when they were murdering millions of people around the world while establishing the British Empire that they said the sun never, the sun never declines on it, whatever they say. You don't know what I'm talking about. Whatever. The legislation undermines the protection and freedoms of all Ugandans. False. Because Ugandans that aren't homosexual, it doesn't affect them in any way, shape, or form. It will increase the risk of violence, discrimination, and persecution. Set back the fight against HIV and AIDS will damage Uganda's international reputation. Also false. All of that is false. Let's just be honest. If a person engaging in those activities and they're just walking around like a normal person and don't have pink hair and out here, dudes wearing dresses and all types of other stuff, if those things aren't going on, no one even knows they exist. Because people in Africa aren't running around asking people, are they homophobes? Uganda's president, Yoweri Museveni, signed the law which includes the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality. Despite Western condemnation and the risk of sanctions, he stood up strong. The British Foreign Office said it would continue to stand up for human rights. Stand up for homosexuality. That's what they're saying. Yes, human rights. Give me a break. All right, so I think we see one of the main drives here is to push homosexuality, because again, what did the general say? The explosion of the populace in Africa, in essence, will be detrimental for us. Thank you, brother. Sun never says on the British Empire. I can't remember what it was. Right? So if he's saying that there's too many people being born in Africa, then it makes perfect sense that they're pushing what? Homosexuality. Because one thing we know, if you take 100 homosexual males and put them on one island, and 100 homosexual females and put them on another island, the only way they're going to survive is if somebody gets a boat and goes to the other side and does what naturally occurs between men and women. Right? Now, what has been the response of some of the people who actually are sane? Let's take a look at it. U.S. set to evacuate illegal troops from Niger, strengthening ties with Russia as it pulls back from Western allies. Niger deemed U.S. troops present illegal. I don't know what this says because it's been a long time since I read French, but it's something to the effect of skedaddle. All right, this is from May 20th, the day after Malcolm X Day. I'm sure Malcolm was like, all righty now. Congratulations. It says the United States says it will pull out all its troops out of Niger within the next 4 months or so after the West African country's military ordered them to Vamoose. Niger last month told Washington to withdraw its military personnel, which numbered close to 1,000, branding their presence as illegal. The military government, which took power last year, has already overseen the withdrawal of troops from former colonial power and traditional quote-unquote security ally. First of all, if you colonize somebody, you're not an ally. You're a dictator. Like, we're all adults here. We can tell the truth. And as it has strengthened ties with the bear, Mr. Russia. The U.S. pullout has already begun, the Pentagon and Nigerian defense officials confirmed in a joint statement on Sunday, with all the troops set to vacate the country by September 15th at the latest. Remind me to come back on here September 16th and see if that's actually been done. Until a coup last year, Niger had been a key partner of the West and involved in Washington's fight against armed groups in the Sahel. The new agreement between Niger's defense ministry and the U.S. Department of Defense reached after a 5-day meeting, guarantees the protection of U.S. troops until their withdrawal. The joint statement said the withdrawal of American forces from Niger in no way affects the pursuit of relations between the United States and Niger in the area of development. Hey, we read Confessions of an Economic Hitman. There's one thing you got to watch out for is that quote-unquote development. Yeah, you can get caught slipping with that. Anyway, also, Niger and the United States are committed to an ongoing diplomatic dialogue to define the future of bilateral relations. U.S. troops and some gear have already begun leaving the country, senior military officials told Reuters. The plan is to remove all lethal, hazardous, or classified equipment before the last U.S. troops depart, but items determined to be too expensive to fly out could be left for the Nigerian military to use instead. Well, that's mighty nice of you. Officials added. Niger's military rulers seized power in July 2023. A few months later, the military government asked French forces to skedaddle, leave, get out, and turn to Russian mercenary group, the Wagner Group, for security assistance. In October, Washington officially designated the military takeover as a coup, which triggered U.S. laws restricting military support and aid. Niger announced in March it was ending military cooperation agreement with Washington, saying its presence of the U.S. soldiers was now illegal. The order for the U.S. to withdraw came after Washington expressed concern about potential potential Nigerian, excuse me, it's two different places, relations with Russia and Iran. The coup and subsequent breakaway from Western countries in favor of Russia follows similar moves in neighboring countries of Burkina Faso and Mali. Among the Nigerian public, opinion has long been hostile to the presence of foreign forces. 2022, about 2/3 of Nigerians disagree with the government's use of foreign military forces to secure the country, according to an Afrobarometer survey. And that's the end of that article. Now, what I want to do before we close out is I want to hear, because we've heard from everybody, I think, except for Black people. So who we're going to hear from real quick is one of our strong upcoming leaders, who seems to be, from what I can gather, an African nationalist who believes in African sovereignty and is not a sucker. So we bring our good brother, Mr. Ibrahim Traoré, to the stage. We're going to listen to him real quick.
Famille en ce sens que la Russie est une famille aussi pour l'Afrique. C'est une famille parce que nous avons la même histoire. La Russie a consenti d'énormes sacrifices pour libérer le monde du nazisme pendant la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Les peuples africains, nos grands-pères, ont été déportés de force aussi pour aider l'Europe à se débarrasser du nazisme. Nous partageons la même histoire en ce sens que nous sommes les peuples oubliés du monde. Qu'ils soient dans les livres d'histoire, dans les documentaires ou films, on tend donc à balayer le rôle prépondérant qu'a joué la Russie et de l'Afrique dans cette lutte contre le nazisme. Pour ce qui concerne le Burkina Faso, aujourd'hui nous sommes confrontés depuis plus de 8 ans à la forme de manifestation la plus barbare, la plus violente du néocolonialisme, de l'impérialisme. L'esclavage qu'on tend encore à nous imposer. Nos dévanciers nous ont bien appris une chose. L'esclave qui n'est pas capable d'assumer sa révolte ne mérite pas que l'on s'apitoie sur son sort. Nous ne nous apitoyons pas sur nos sorts, on ne demande pas que quelqu'un s'apitoie sur notre sort. Le peuple burkinabé a décidé de lutter contre le terrorisme en mesure de relancer son développement. Dans cette lutte, des vaillants peuples, des vaillantes populations se sont engagées à prendre les armes face au terrorisme, ceux que nous avons affectueusement appelés les VDP, des volontaires. Nous sommes surpris de voir les impérialistes traiter ces VDP de milices et de tout type. C'est décevant, parce qu'en Europe, lorsque des peuples prennent les armes pour défendre leur patrie, on les traite de patriotes. Mais là n'est pas le problème. Ce qui est le problème, c'est de voir des chefs d'État africains qui n'apportent rien à ces peuples qui se battent, mais qui chantent la même chose que les impérialistes en nous traitant de milices, en nous traitant donc d'hommes qui ne respectent pas les droits de l'homme. De quels droits de l'homme parle-t-on? Nous nous offusquons contre cela et c'est honteux. Il faut que nous, chefs d'État africains, nous arrêtons de nous comporter donc en marionnettes qui dansent à chaque fois que les impérialistes tirent sur les ficelles. Hier, le président Vladimir Poutine a annoncé donc l'envoi de céréales en Afrique. Nous sommes bien contents. Nous lui disons merci pour cela. Mais aussi, c'est un message passé à nous, chefs d'État africains, parce qu'au prochain forum, nous ne devrons pas venir ici sans avoir assuré, pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas la guerre, l'autosuffisance alimentaire de nos peuples. Nous devons prendre l'expérience de ceux qui ont pu déjà atteindre cela en Afrique, tisser de bonnes relations ici et tisser de meilleures relations avec la Fédération de Russie pour pouvoir assouvir les besoins de nos populations. Gloire à nos peuples, dignité à nos peuples, victoire à nos peuples. La patrie ou la mort, nous vaincrons. Merci, camarades.
I'm going to be completely honest. I absolutely love that brother's spirit. Like he just looked like he's not here to play no games. He said, look, man, African leaders have stopped acting like puppets, dancing at the whim of our enemies. Right? He said, those who understand war know that we have to be self-sufficient in feeding ourselves. Like this dude, this young brother is thorough, man. It's like the spirit of Thomas Sankara has come back in person. And the reason I played that because I wanted to show the difference between bootlicking leadership that we showed earlier and thorough 100% manhood, like a leadership by a man who's not here to play no game and who is a revolutionary and believes in the freedom and independence of Black people on the continent, starting with his country and moving forward. And he's moving strategically because if you look at it, right, what he did was so profound because he said African people have a history and we made sacrifices fighting against Nazism, which neutralizes the argument that's going to eventually come of them being some type of anti-Semites when they find out what the small hat is doing in their area. Right? So this, man, I'm just so happy that this brother Ibrahim Traore has stepped up to fulfill the aspirations for freedom and independence for his people. And the other brothers of that what we call the One Africa Project, that's a Sahel region, standing strong and doing what they need to do to survive and eventually thrive and resurrect African liberation. So with that, brothers and sisters, I thank you all for listening. I thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram at dc.radical1, on Twitter at dcradicalone, on OTWTube at dcradical1. You can donate via Cash App if you found value in the program, $DC_Radical1. And you can email me at dc.radical_1@protonmail.com. Please make sure that you go and check out the shorts that we put up about our excursions to the various museums here in Washington, D.C. And also be on the lookout for more content as we continue our 30 pieces of content in 30 days. And we also will spread the message via Instagram and on YouTube and on Telegram for those who are part of our Telegram program. So be on the lookout for more content this week. Thank you all for your support. And hopefully next week, I will have some announcements that I think you all will enjoy if those things come through. So with that, brothers and sisters, I say BB Fodie and straight Black pride. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also follow us on our other social media platforms. On Instagram, we're at dc.radical1. On Twitter, we're at dc_radical_one. And the Cash App is $DC_Radical1. Again, thank you for subscribing. A BB Fodie and straight Black pride.